could be. I need somebody to check. Let me see. I don't know. All right, good evening. I'm just gonna let more people come in. They're in the waiting room.
Sounds good.
Hello.
Yep. You can't hear us?
I just There was an echo. I just wanted to know if it was us.
Oh no, there's no echo on my side.
Yes, there is an echo.
Okay. Do you hear an echo, Brittany?
I don't really hear an echo.
It comes like a minute later.
Oh,
Hold on.
okay.
I think the last time it was with the YouTube.
Are you on YouTube, Cinnamon?
Um, Let me ask Akita.
Yes. Am I?
I think you probably need to X
It's
out of.
me. Remember, it was me. I need to turn me down.
You needed to X out your YouTube. Do you hear echo when I speak?
I'm not on it. I don't know where it's coming from.
Well, there's no echo on our side, so I think we could just. Akita said there's no echo on you on the YouTube on the live, so we're good.
We're good. It's fine. It's okay. It's okay.
Let's get this show going the road.
It's me. All right, we're gonna let a couple more people come in. Just gonna ignore it.
All right, let's get this show on the road.
Okay, it's 7:05. Good evening, everyone. I don't want to belabor us. I know we only have an hour to be in community with one another, but thank you for the people who are joining on YouTube. Thank you so much. Those of you who have come back from Zoom, who have been with us last month, welcome back. New people, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate you joining a community with us. Um, we do not take it lightly that you have come back to discuss our girls.
You lost your audio. So we're having a little bit of technical difficulty. So we're just grateful and thankful that you all have come in community with us and talking about our young ladies, right? And so grounding you all in this idea of African-centered education and how we impact our children, our girl children tonight will be focused on. Um, Tonight, we are talking about how do we nurture Black girls through African-centered education, right? So just introducing ourselves, my name is Sinemet Olatunji. I am an educator of 20 years. I have been a secondary teacher, an instructional coach. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, work primarily in the child welfare space. I currently do some macro social work and working in educational attainment in the state of North Carolina. I also have been an adjunct professor teaching child welfare policy, social welfare policy, and also introduction to social work and some clinical classes as well. And I am joined here with my co-host, Khadijah Smith, and not sure if she is able to introduce herself. No? Okay, well, tonight we are also, Khadijah is also a educator, a veteran educator, and has been an educator for 19 years. She has been a principal. She currently serves as a consultant. She is also an adjunct professor in the math department at Howard University and is very passionate about this topic. Khadijah and I are both, as you know, young, we are women. And, we are daughters and we are mothers to young girls. And so this conversation is critical for us. This conversation is on time for us. We are about, raising daughters that live their most empowered selves. And so tonight we are also joined by Dr. Brittany Clark. And we're going to bring Brittany in a little bit later in the conversation, and I will do a formal introduction for her. Oh, it looks like Khadijah is back online. I will do a formal introduction of Dr. Brittany Clark, but we just want to say thank you, Dr. Clark, for being here with us to have this conversation.
Yes, thank you. I'm back.
Okay.
Technical difficulty solved.
It's the air in Denver.
Yes. So thank you so much, Cinema, for setting the stage and introducing me. So I will just go on and I won't belabor this and talk about the statistics for Black girls. As you know, we are mothers of daughters and we're also daughters ourselves. So this is very near and dear to us of how our children are growing and matriculating through this world, through school systems, and how we are grounding them into their own womanhood. So let's talk about it. Ooh. The first statistic is, of course, school discipline. Our girls are five times more likely to be suspended, which reflects, of course, perpetuates the school to prison pipeline. We know that our girls are seen as overly mature, as seen as women, seen as people, their attitudes and their moods are not seen as women going through, or young ladies, girls going through their own understanding of who they are and trying to find themselves. They're automatically seen as grown women lashing out rather than young girls trying to find their way and trying to find their voice, as they should in 13-year-olds and 14-year-old spaces where most of these statistic suspensions are happening. Our girls do not have the outlet to be themselves. That also is a reflection of our own mothers in our own maturity and understanding who we are, because a lot of times we perpetuate growing up in responsibility and push that on our girls, knowing that that was survival for us. It does not have to be survival for our girls, right? A lot of things that we took on as young girls, as mothers, wasn't supposed to be our responsibility. And it does not have to be our daughter's responsibility as they grow and mature in their own development. Second, of course, this sexual violence and exploitation of 60% of Black girls are experience sexual abuse by age 18. because as that's historical, we were overly sexualized. Our body parts are overly sexualized. Everything that we are seeing as grown women going through our own body development, and with the foods that we eat and all those things contributing to how our bodies are developing, even in this age, even in looking at my daughter and looking at her own development versus mine, especially body maturity, it's definitely more, it's rapid, right? In understanding that our girls deserve to be girls. They deserve to express themselves through clothing, through hair, through their own art forms, right? Because girls are art, right? How we express ourselves, how we make clothes. I used to make clothes, right? How we do our hair. We all did our hair, right? How we do those things should be a place where we are getting to know ourselves and understand ourselves, not a place where we are penalized and being treated and being violated. Should not be that space for us and our young girls and how we mature through society. And the last for me is unmet mental health needs. Black girls are twice as likely to attempt suicides as their white peers, yet receive less mental health due to stigma, access gaps, and misdiagnosis. Our girls are seen as complainers, right? As just these places where they're just moody and just want to be whiny and those kind of things, and not seen as this being actuality. Not saying that those things aren't a part of their just in their development, but overly emphasized and not being treated as serious, right? We already know Black women are seen as overly strong. That starts in a place of who we are now growing up. And if we see each other and see our girls as this place of them needing to have over responsibilities, having more, being more mature and being more to recognize themselves, right? We treat Black girls as they're supposed to be their own security. Well, you see what you had on. Why didn't you change, right? You see how you were voicing yourself, not as young girls still developing and trying to find their voice, right? I don't know what this clothing does for me. I don't know what the words that come out my mouth do for me. I don't know the reaction that I receive because of these things. And how do we as mothers, as community, better have wisdom over scrutiny for our young girls and understanding that they're still developing. I don't care how they react or how they respond or how mature they sound. They're 13, they're 12, they're 14, they're figuring it out. They're 18, right? They're still figuring it out. And though the world says these things and the world says they should be someplace and the world has this space of where they should be, our girls are still trying to learn themselves. And that's our responsibility as community to teach them those things. And as mothers, we are not perpetuating that same cycle that we had to be. We're stepping back and letting our girls grow up as girls, right? Having play dates and having them experiencing those spaces with you all. In my experience as an educator, I do see we are parents until 5th grade. And then from middle school to high school, we are hands off and we assume that our girls are ready for the world. And though parenthood should change and shift, it still requires intentional checking in, intentional relationship, intentional talking, grounding yourself in controlling the narrative, right? Because the peers control the narrative, and that shouldn't be the case. We should be the loudest voice, and then affirming them so their inner voice is the loudest voice. Toni Morrison said, the freeing yourself, right? The claiming the freedom yourself is one part, but to claim that freedom for yourself, right? It's one thing that we have at our adulthood as Black women, we have know that we need to be free. It's another thing that now that we know we need to be free, claiming that freedom for ourselves and our daughters, claiming that as ourselves, not as oh, you need to work to get there. No, you deserve to be free. You deserve to have your freedom. You deserve those things. And teaching our daughters that that's not something they need to work for. It's something that is their birthright. It's inherent. Never.
Asha, thank you for that. We wanted to also just highlight, how our young ladies are faring in the child welfare system. And when you look at the statistics of child welfare, I say this, and I mentioned earlier on in the discussion that, the majority of my work has been in child welfare as a social worker. The village has failed these children, right? When we look at the fact that our children are only 14% of the child population, yet they make up 23% of the child welfare system, that speaks to us abdicating our responsibility to Black children, right? The system was never designed to raise children. And so in the African-centered way, we always took care of our own. We always took care of our children. There was no reason for a child welfare system, a formal child welfare system in traditional African society, right? If there were parents who were unable to care for their children, then the village stepped in, the community stepped in. And so we are seeing now, this overrepresentation of Black girls and Black children in child welfare, and the outcomes that our young girls are facing, they're faring worse than all of their counterparts, right? We're seeing that they have longer stays in foster care. So they're not reunifying and going back home to their families, which is supposed to be the point of the child welfare system, that you come in and you address the needs of the family and then you allow that child to come back. No, we're not seeing that. These young girls are aging out of the foster care system. And what does that say, right? The family is supposed to be rooted in the development of that child, of inculcating the values in that child so that they can grow to be the women, right? Women who are empowered, women who are able to step into their destinies. And when you remove that child from the family and from the community, that is cut off, right? That family line is cut off. That bloodline is cut off. That connection to community is cut off. We're seeing that our girls are being placed in group homes, right? What child thrives in congregate care in a group home? There's no child that thrives really. You might have one or two that do, and that's not because they were in that group home. There was some external influence that perhaps helped that child to be able to navigate the horrors of a group home, because you see some, very horrific things that happen to these girls. But a group home is never a good place for a child to be raised. And then we see a greater risk of trafficking and trauma. And so, child welfare is just not child welfare in and of itself. There are so many different intersections that occur, right? They say the child welfare system is the backdoor to homelessness, right? To increase mental health issues, to increase, health disparities. And our young girls are being trafficked. Folks know that because of the trauma that they've experienced, that they are more vulnerable and susceptible to wanting to be loved, right? To wanting to get and feel what they know that they're supposed to get and feel. And so they fall susceptible to sex trafficking and human trafficking. Next slide. The other thing is the criminalization of trauma responses. Khadija talked a little bit about that when she talked about the unmet health needs, right? And so Black girls, oftentimes trauma, when we look at behaviors of young girls, right, we say that this is them being maladaptive, that they are, defiant, that they don't listen, that they don't do what they're supposed to do. Whereas this is really a response to the trauma that they are experiencing. And so rather than getting to the root of the issue of understanding why that young girl might be, quote unquote, acting out, or why she might be responding in the way that she is responding, our girls are 3 times more likely to be referred to juvenile justice for trauma-related behaviors, right? And so we are not honoring the fact that these girls are experiencing this trauma, and then we are further traumatizing them by treating them as if they are criminals. And then Khadija talked a little bit about this too, in terms of adultification bias, that because our girls might be a little bit more developed, or they express themselves in ways that mainstream society doesn't understand, that they are looked at as adults as opposed to the children that they are, right? We don't allow our girls to just be girls, right? And our girls are expressive. If you have ever worked with young ladies, okay, I always tell people, you have not lived until you have worked with young people, right? It is the most, it's to me, it's one of the best things that you could ever do, is to mentor a young person, go and talk to a young person, because they understand, right, what it means to live in their own power and in their own empowerment. So we just wanted to just kind of set the stage a little bit. And I want to say that these are experiences that our young people are having, our young girls are having. It is not who they are in totality, right? These are our children, and their destinies are bright and rich and full, right? And they just need adults who are willing to really invest in them. who understand their brilliance, who see that they have destinies that are brighter than the current circumstances that they are experiencing. And so we have one such person on the line. And, I'll let Brittany talk a little bit about our own personal connection. But I just want to welcome Dr. Brittany Clark. And I'll read a little bit about her bio, but Dr. Brittany Clark is an educator with over a decade of experience and a doctorate in educational equity. Her journey to creating the Black Girls for Liberation Collective stems from both her professional and personal experiences as an educator, a mother to 3 Black daughters, but she is a mama to 7, and a member of the Black community. Through these experiences, she recognized the profound absence of spaces where Black girls could process their experiences, show up authentically in their ways of being, and be affirmed for exactly who they are. Grounded in a commitment to celebrating Black girlhood, Brittany is dedicated to co-creating spaces for Black girls that foster identity affirmation, freedom, dreaming, and liberation. She believes in the power of intentional, thoughtful relationships, spaces where Black girls can heal, connect, and thrive in community with one another. These spaces are vital for supporting Black girls not only as they navigate adolescence, but also as they prepare for adulthood with the tools to sustain meaningful relationships with Black women. So welcome, Dr. Clark. And we are going to jump into some Q&As and conversations in community with Brittany. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, yes, yes. So the first question that we're going to ask you is, you attended an African-centered charter high school. Can you share how that experience shaped your sense of identity, purpose, and place in the world?
Yes. So when Sinemet talks about, having worked with young people, there was once upon a time where I was a young girl and Sinemet was my teacher back in the day. Who would think it? Because we look like the same age. So, I mean, like, I had no idea at the time. But yeah, so I went to an African-centered high school. It was called Kemetic Institute for Magnificent Achievers in Washington, D.C. And, I was thinking about this question a little bit early because I was like, how am I going to kind of like discuss and talk about this? And even like coming into the space, right? Like, and I remember I was like trying to find a high school to go to because I was like in transition. And a friend of mine who was at the school at the time, I don't know how we got on the phone, but he called me and he was like, "You should come to this school, man." He was like, "The principal is taking people to Africa and and we're learning about, like African civilizations and how, the brilliance of African people. And like, you should really come." And I'm like, okay. Like, it was like, it just seems too easy. And I remember like kind of going into the space and taking a placement test, and kind of the rest is history in terms of like how I entered into the school. But I think that it was transformational for me and my identity because, at the time, DC was still, chocolate city, right? Like, it was still had a heavy Black population. But I think the difference was in entering that space was it was like we were immersed in Black brilliance, Black ingenuity, Black innovation. And it wasn't in comparison to anything, right? Because like, I think, even when I think about sometimes the little tidbits that we get of Black history or Black history in like public schools, it is through the lens of like trauma or suffering or in comparison to whiteness, right? But at Kima, there was like none of that. To be honest, I don't remember conversations around the period of enslavement, right? Like, it was like ancient civilization. I remember, Tony Browder's like Egypt on the Nile. And that was kind of like our history textbook, right? So like we are learning and entering into this like knowledge base from a place of, these are the powers, this is the brilliance, this is the genius that we possess, it is inherent in us. And it kind of like set the stage to not look outside of ourselves, right? And I mean that like on an individual and collective level, right? Like you are enough, but also like look at these, look at your peers, look at the folks in this building who also showed up as community members, right? Like it didn't feel like these were my teachers, like full stop. It was like, these are like the aunties, these are like, you know, the mother figures, and even the men in the building, right? Because I think that we were fortunate to have some Black men in the space too that were like Babas, like they were like the folks that you could have conversations with. And I think that it just shaped how I saw kind of like my life's path, right? Like I could do anything. Um, and at that time, I didn't know that I would like end up going into education. But I think that when I think about where I am now, and like in my journey in education, and even how I homeschool my own children, I think has definitely kind of shaped the culture and the practices that I implement in doing that. And then it kind of, you know, set the stage for going off to college, right? Because we were immersed in this like African centered space, and it provided so much access and so much instilling of confidence because, you know, we did our thing in the school, and even how we went about engaging outside of like the physical environment of Kima was still very much rooted in our genius and our brilliance. And I want to just kind of share a quick example. Like we had a debate team, right? Like, and this is, I had never done debate or anything like this. I'm like, debate, like, what is that? You know, and when you think about like the traditional sport of debate, it is a very white, male dominated space. At private school, uniforms, the whole thing, right? So we're doing debate and we're using like quotes from Bell Hooks. We're using Lauryn Hill's the acoustic, her album where she's just kind of like playing the guitar. Like we're using lyrics from that, and we had this like very non-traditional form that was fully representative of who we are, and how, you know, culturally we use poetry and music and, you know, our emotion, right? Because also debate is typically kind of void of emotion, and we're coming in no uniforms, these like Black kids from DC going all up and down the East Coast, Vermont, just all everywhere, right? Walking in and like literally taking home championships in debate. And I think that like, you know, having Kima as like this like safe haven, this space where we were allowed to show up as our full selves, but also being nurtured, right? Because we're still adolescents, we're still kind of trying to figure it out, but being held in love and care allowed us to show up in the world as our full selves, you know, even outside of that space. So I don't know if I answered the question, but that is how it helped to shape my identity, gave me confidence, and kind of instilled these kind of like uh, 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 nuggets for, you know, my life's journey.
No, you did. That was great because I was going to go somewhere else, but now I'm going to go. I have a question for you, but now I wanted to change the way I formatted this question because you're born and raised in DC, right? So I want to understand, and a lot of our community is not from DC, and understanding that, but how has that, you're born and raised in DC, you come to this African Center High School, right? And now you're homeschooling your children, right? So the question is, what have been some of the most joyful or surprising lessons you've encountered in homeschooling Black children with love, tradition, and intention as it relates to how you then were raised in the traditional sense in DC?
Yeah. I think that growing up in DC and thinking about how I raised my children and even making the choice to not raise them there, right? Like I think is important because, or important to know or to talk about a little bit because um, if I'm being very transparent, you know, it wasn't the safest city or, you know, the safest environments at all times, you know, and I think that I was blessed in being able to live like in a relatively safe neighborhood. But when I think about like some of the schools, right, like some of the schools that my friends might have attended and like the violence that existed therein or the push out that existed therein, or, you know, just some of the situations that like my peers might have found themselves in, which I think was due to a lack of care, right? Like from the adults in their educational environments, you know, and elsewhere, but particularly in educational environments, right? Um, I think about, again, being very fortunate and blessed to have been able to find us. And another thing about Kima was that it was so small, right? Like I think there is something to be said about having small environments where there is like a a cultivating of deep and meaningful relationships with all of the folks in that space, right? Particularly the teachers and I'm saying teachers, but it was really all the adults in the space, right? Like everybody from our security to our like office administration, all of the things, all of the people from like our capoeira teacher, like it just everybody in the space, right? Like having those opportunities to cultivate these like deep relationships that like spilled over and didn't just last from like the school hours, I think is important. But like going back to my upbringing in the city and then like raising my children here in North Carolina, right? I think about still not being fully satisfied with public schools, right? Like not feeling like they are giving my children what they need, nor recognizing their full genius. And so as a result, I'm like, I could do this. I believe I feel like I can do a better job than all of the teachers here, right? And that's not like no shade to the teachers, but just thinking about capacity, right? Like when you have classes of 30 plus students, you know, when you're being tasked with all the other things outside of just teaching the children that are in front of you, like that takes a lot. And so I think that as I have like been in the classroom in my professional experience and recognize that, you know, some of the shortcomings of just the environment, I made a really conscious effort to like bring them home so that we could practice and have a culture of the values that I believe would serve them well, right? Like when I think about, you know, just the value in community, this idea that it's not about you as an individual, it's about us as a collective, right? Like, and how we grow and journey on our path of learning together. And then also just thinking about the joy of being able to see each of my children who learn differently, right? Like, for example, my 7-year-old, even when he was in school for the stint that we did, I was constantly conferencing with teachers around, like he has high energy, right? Like, so what are we going to do about the fact that he can't sit down properly? And so I take joy in seeing him be able to show up as his best full energy self when we learn day to day. And then also finding ways to continue to be able to kind of like allow him to express his energy on his learning journey. I think those are things that are really joyful for me. And then just also allowing them to be able to learn things that are really that they're really passionate about is something that I don't think they always get the opportunity to do in a traditional setting, right? Because they have like a really standard curriculum. They don't go outside of that. A lot of times they are not seeing themselves. They're not getting to do these deep dives into their own histories, whether that when we think about like you know, like ancestral African wisdom or, you know, even like family lineage, right? Like, where do we come from? Like, how do we do a deep dive there? Those are the things that I find joy in being able to educate my children and thinking about, you know, even location, because we have our family origins are in North Carolina. So I even think about, you know, being able to kind of like celebrate that, because if you would have asked me when I was growing up in the city, would I ever move to North Carolina? The answer would have been no, because I'm not going to the South. But you know, here we are, and it's a beautiful environment. And I'm really happy to be raising my children here.
Thank you so much. Just such powerful reflections. So we've talked about self, we've talked about family, and now we're going to go to community, right? And so we know that you are the founder of Black Girls for Liberation Collective, and this is work that is rooted in the, affirmation, joy, and healing for Black girls. And we highlighted a few of those statistics, and I know that you see these statistics in real time in the work that you do. So talk to us a little bit about Black Girls for Liberation Collective, your vision for creating this for Black girls, why you decided to do this, and how you bring African-centered values and ancestral wisdom, right, to spaces that affirm Black girls.
Yeah. So, like you kind of gave a really beautiful overview of what Black Girls Liberation is, and thinking about being a third space dedicated to nurturing Black girls, particularly at the adolescent stage of middle school, because these are questions where they are asking questions. This is the stage where they're asking questions about their identity, right? Like, who am I? And, uh, Khadijah, you were spot on when you were talking about their peers being the loudest voice during this period. And, peer influence is sometimes, it's not always the best influence. And so if they're getting like peer pressure or kind of like struggling to unpack the different messages and the avenues that they're coming at, I wanted to be able to, and, thinking about my own experience being in the classroom in middle school, and seeing that there wasn't a space for them to process how they were journeying, how they were kind of trying to find their way without it being problematized, scrutinized. I've often found that my classroom was the spot where they were coming to kind of talk through some of that. And then even, at the time I was serving as the education chair on the Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People, and we were having this state of Black student addresses, and we were like trying to find organizations that were youth centered, and there wasn't anything that was specific to Black girls. And so I kind of was toying with the idea, and additionally I also have 3 daughters, two of them who fall within this age range, and kind of like putting all of that into the mix. I was like, okay, I'm going to take this on, and attempt to create a space, right? And not only attempt to create it, but be in conversation and collaboration with the girls who the space is for. And so thinking about the importance of co-creating the space was something that I felt was super important. And so now we're in year 3, and I am, okay, I was trying to like track what the question was. All right. So yeah, now we're in year 3. And so now not only is it a third space, but there's also a framework, right? We have a Black Girls Literacy framework, which kind of starts with self-study, and then we go through remembering, and it's cyclical. So it's not necessarily like the self-study is always happening. It's always a piece of it. And then we have the remembering, right? Which is kind of like looking at, who are the Black women and Black girls who have come before, who have used their voice and the agency to create change in their communities. Then we go through unpacking different messaging. So whether that's social media, peers, larger media sources, and then kind of separating like this kind of internal narrative versus like, what are some of the characteristics or the things that have been put on me by other people that I don't necessarily believe, and how can I like be in control of kind of like filtering out this messaging that doesn't land, or that I don't believe, or don't, that I don't want for myself. And then the focus on relationship building, because this is also a time where there's some tensions, right? Like friend groups are changing. And so it's like, how can we love each other, even if we don't necessarily like each other right now? Because I think that's really important. And if we're kind of like having like a conversation, like at the kitchen table, it's like, it's cool. Like everyone is not going to be best friends, but we can still show up and support and be there for one another without having to be like disrespectful for one another. And then we have the heart of the matter, which is kind of like this like critical consciousness building and thinking about like how do we address the issues that are impacting us as a collective. And so this framework was created from like Nguzu Saba, right? So we have the 7 principles there, and then Gholdy Muhammad's Black literacy framework. And so kind of thinking about the qualities. So you have like unity, self-determination, collective work and responsibility, cooperative economics, purpose, creativity, and like faith. And if you, I'm going like this because they're like these 2 like inverted pyramids, and then like the Black Girls for Liberation framework is the pyramid at the bottom. So they are pouring in. And then, so for the Black Girls Literacies framework, there are these like multiple modalities of literacy, right? And so like when I talk about us like unpacking messaging or self-study that's done in various forms, thinking about, you know, identity development, the historical piece of it, because we utilize like ancestral wisdom or historical knowledge to help shape and inform like how we understand ourselves and how we can move forward, and thinking about the importance of collaboration, because I think that is also how we talk about this idea of liberation. It has to be a collective, and then the intellectual piece and the political or critical piece of the work. And so those 2 have helped to shape the framework, and really kind of set the stage for how the space is shaped. And when we think about like historical movements, like literary societies, or even historical like the literary societies in the Black community, or also comes to mind like the Black Panther Party. It was kind of like this collective, collaborative, like liberation for the freedom of all of us. And so those are the things that have helped shape the work of Black Girls Liberation.
Well, you know, when we talk about Black girls and creating frameworks for them, and there's several other things that are not connected to African-centered spaces, right? We have a lot of things, like there's parents on here, there's community members on here that really want to help girls, and they sign their children up for Girl Scouts, they sign their children up for Big Sister, right? Like they sign their children up for things that collectively in those spaces are looked at to help and to build some, you know, self-work around girls. How do you separate yourself from that, right? And what practical things would be different in your space, and how you ground things in it being African-centered versus it just being a space for girls?
Yeah. No, thank you for that question. So I think that we're very explicit about it being a place for Black girls, and about it being a co-created space, right? So even when we come in and we do like our circles, and together we create a creed, right? So like, you know, thinking about like how like each individual girl naming like what do they need in that space, right, to make them feel seen and to make them feel whole. And so from each girl's input, then we develop a creed, and that creed is recited each time we come together and share space together. And then also thinking about this when we do like check-in questions, or like when we have discussions, a lot of it is focused and centered and explicit about their intersecting identities, right? Like, what does it mean to be and to live in a Black girl's body? And so I think when I think about other programs, also another thing is like, it's not about like programming, right, girls. And I think that is something that kind of, I want to be very clear about that. Like, we haven't created like this whole structure, this whole model, because we feel like this is going to help, you know, your girl be better than she is. It is really about being able to accept them and affirm them as they show up, right? And that's not to say they are showing up or coming in as they're like this. We don't have a model of like what it means to be a perfect Black girl. I think that there's no broad strokes for which you can paint Black girlhood, right? Like, it looks different. And so we emphasize just this space of affirmation, and being able to nurture them where they need to be nurtured, recognizing that they're still children. And I think that the activities, the questioning, the conversations, the texts, right, the poems, all of the the tools and the resources that we use in the space is very intentional to thinking about what it means to live in a Black girl's body, what it means to um, uh, think about their ways of being. Earlier, you talked about the way that Black girls emote, right? The way that we dress, the way that we wear our hair, the way that we find, um, uh, the way that we laugh, right? The way that there's some commonality around that as a culture of Black girlhood. And I think those are, when I think about Black girls' liberation, the things that we kind of like hold space for. And want them to kind of like revel in, like, what is the joy of being a Black girl? Like, is it playing double dutch? Is it playing hand games? Right. And like, those are the things that I think about when I think of my Black girlhood. But we also know that Black girlhood is evolving. And so what are the things that Black girls are doing today that are kind of like the equivalents of hand games from back in the day, right? Like, is it TikTok dances, right? Like, what is the thing? And giving them space to enjoy that.
I like that. I think a lot of the times we feel like a lot of our programs for Black women and Black girls are trying to get them to be something, right? Like, this is what it means to be a such and such. Mm-hmm. This is what it means to be this. This is what it means to be this. And it stifles their uniqueness, right? It stifles, like you said, like, what does it mean to just show up in my body? Mm-hmm. What does it mean to just be me? Right? Because a lot of the time we get lost in whatever the title is that we put on us of trying to be this person, right? And that connection is lost a lot of the time because we want to be the perfect dainty girl, right? We want our daughters to be this perfect dainty girl because that's what we've idolized, ignoring their uniqueness, their unique quality that they came into the world and showed up in the world to be, right? Just to be, right? Requires work. Right now, you're wanting me to then assimilate to a space where you desire me and how you want me to show up. And so, how does your program? Because we have to bring it back to this African-centered space of course, the principle of let's talk about rites of passage, mm-hmm. right? Rites of passage were programs and spaces where not programs. There were spaces where adults and elders understood this is your time in your lifespan, where you're going to develop and you're understanding yourself and you're trying to navigate yourself. And I understand that because we've all come through this passage. Boys have their space with their men, girls have their space with the women, and to cultivate that space and what does it mean to be in yourself. So how would you say that your connections with rites of passage, or maybe no connections with rites of passage, is there a connection, or is there like, well, I tried to move away or innovate more from our rites of passage? Like, is there a rites of passage connection?
Yeah, no, I think the rites of passage is really important, right? Like, and I think about, different periods or stages of life where, like maybe girls are like entering their menses or like going into, like 16, like just different, like, earmarks, right? Like on their developmental journey. And so it's something that when I think about like, what does it look like for Black girls' liberation to kind of like engage with this notion of rites of passage? It's not something that I would veer away from, right? Like, I don't think there is a need to like innovate or do something new as it relates to that, because I think it helps us to kind of like stay grounded in like who we are, right? Like traditionally and culturally. But I'll say that, at this, where we are right now, it really is just about like establishing this, like this third space, right? Like this safe and affirming space. And we've had one cohort, because like before, when we first started out, we were just kind of doing like these monthly programmings and like workshops. But then this past school year, we did a cohort of girls that we engaged with for the entire year. And we were working with them 2 times a month. And then we had kind of like some special sessions built in, and we had some social outings. And I'm like, as I'm talking through this, and I'm like, oh, we actually did do a rites of passage, but we didn't call it a rites of passage. But I'm thinking, I'm like, because at the end of the year, we had a celebration where it was called like giving Black girls their flowers. And that was the kind of like ending of their year with the cohort. And we invited their mamas in, right? So it was like Black mamas and Black daughters. And it was, we had like, they dressed up. Oh man, it was beautiful. They dressed up. We had flowers, we had tea, we had all types of snacks and crafts. And then we brought them back together to ask them like how they wanted to stay connected and involved. And so like some of them are currently Black Girls Liberation ambassadors, right? And so they kind of like they presented at conferences and talking about their experiences and why these spaces are important for Black girls. And so, wow, even as I'm like talking through that, because I was like, oh, we haven't really done a rites of passage, but I think in some ways that was representative of like them going through this experience where they had this space that was their own, that they got to shape, that they got to get feedback, that they got to get input, that they got to facilitate in some occasions. Um, um, and so I think that that is in alignment with some of the things that we've done.
So an hour goes by so fast, and we are nearing the end of our webinar. And so we know that we have community members on this call who are probably, we hope that this conversation has sparked like, what responsibility do I have for, creating spaces, safe and celebratory spaces for Black girls. And so glad Khadijah brought up, rites of passage, right? When we think about traditional rites of passage, from the time a child is born until they get to, early adolescence, that teenage year, there's been things that have been instilled and inculcated in that child that has prepared them for adulthood, right? And they are then taken by adults who, have shown in the community that they have the values, that they espouse the values to guide these children. And so, if you could think of one thing that the community members that are watching today could do to, be more in community with, the things that are happening for our Black girls, and to, be able to step up, right, and address some of these issues that are happening. What is one thing you would leave, somebody who might not have the training and the tools and the education, like one thing you would leave them in terms of, assisting in this work?
Yeah, I think that is a really good question, right? Because even when you all were sharing the statistics early on, I was also thinking about the government, the US Government Accountability Office, who released a report early, like in August of last year, and talked about, how Black girls just continue to face harsher discipline in school, and they also feel the least safe. And so I think about the need to, even if you don't have the capacity to create these third spaces for Black girls, right? Like, I think it's important to think about like how you can advocate either for the creation of more spaces like this, or hold schools accountable, right? Like start to apply some pressure and hold schools accountable for how they treat and the lack of space that they hold for Black girls there, right? Like push back and start to kind of like look at policies, right? Like how are they harming Black girls? How can you use, like who do you know in your community that you can connect with that may be doing work with youth in general, with Black youth? Think about if there are folks doing work specifically for Black girls. And I think just kind of like taking the time to learn, right? Like inform yourselves of what is going on. How can you show up as a better community member? How can you be an ally? Like whatever, like I think I was on a call yesterday and it was just like, be informed and then pick a position and play your position really well. because I think there are spaces for folks from wherever they're coming from to enter into this conversation, into this work of advocacy, into this work of community building, into this work of protecting Black girls. And so that's what I think I would offer. Yeah, as a general kind of like pull something from there.
I agree. And just in terms of playing your own role and just being, that's powerful, just playing your own role well, right? So if your role is mother, if your role is father, a lot of that playing your role well is being informed and included, like sharing space with your daughter, sharing space with her friends, right? If you have a good relationship with your daughter, invite 2 friends over and share space with them. Just give them the space of safety, right? Sometimes kids just need the space of safety. They're trying to figure out ways to connect. They're trying to figure out ways to be together on the phone. My daughter's on group chats and group phone calls all day. Give them the space. Oh, y'all don't have to be on the phone. You let me organize something where we can all come over. Not only do they get the safe space, you get to hear what they're talking about. Like we underplay just being around to hear what their dialogue is about. What their character shows up in their dialogue. How they decision making shows up in their dialogue. How they see the world shows up in their dialogue. And you're just sitting there and creating space. And you become the safe space. Now they'll talk to you about certain things and you get to impart wisdom, because the truth of the matter is we want to be the narrative shift, right, in their minds when it comes to who's going to be the loudest voice. We want their voice to eventually be the loudest, but our wisdom to be directly after, right? So just in just terms of practicality and playing your role and your role well, let's say you're not in the community, you just being a parent or a role in a child's life creates the space. So I think that's powerful, just creating space and creating dynamics. It doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't. It just has to be you being around, hearing the conversations that you hear and hearing them authentically. So you know where your work lies. I yell to parents all the time, just be quiet and listen. Your daughter will tell you where your work is. She'll tell you where your work needs to be. She'll tell you where more books need to go, what books you need to buy, what things she need to be listening to, by letting her speak. Just letting her speak freely. It'll be like, oh, okay. She don't trust herself. Oh, okay. She don't think she's pretty. Oh, okay. It'll tell you everything you need to do and how you better affirm. So what books do you have any books before we close out? Do you have any books? I know Cinema wants to close out too. Any books, any resources that we can give the parents right now, just in terms of, you quoted bell hooks before. I love me some bell hooks, especially when it comes to women and that whole feminine movement, right? Owning your femininity in those spaces. But anything else that you would like to give to the community?
Yeah, I think all the bell hooks, right? Like all about teaching critical thinking, like all of those books. Yeah, then I'm also thinking like this is a book of poetry by oh man, it's called Black Girl Call Home. And I'm blanking on who the author is right
I'll
now.
look it up. Go ahead. Just continue. So, Black
Yeah.
Girl Call.
Black Girl Call Home. And oh Lord, I'm trying like all of the books, so many books. Um, sharing our soul hosts, sharing our lives, hearing our truths, is another book that I just think is a really great capturing of what does it look like to be in community and make space with Black girls in ways there you have to constantly be checking yourself, right? And these are Black women who are in space with Black girls in particular, right? Because how are the traumas that sometimes Black women hold that may be showing up? And I think Khadija, you were kind of like speaking and naming this earlier, but anyway, we're talking about books real quick. That is all that like is coming off the top of my head right now. But I definitely just want to reiterate just kind of like sharing space, right? Like being holding space and sharing space with Black girls, because I think one of the things that has come out of the work that I'm doing with Black girls is like finding that sometimes my house serves as that space, right? And so some of the girls will, come over here, they'll do sleepovers over here and just kind of like listening in, like around what's the conversation, what's the thing, hearing the interest. And then, some of the other moms, their homes have also become a space. And so I think that speaks to kind of like this building of a village as well, right? So having other women that my daughters feel safe talking to, I think is critically important, because maybe, they might not want to talk to me about everything, and that's okay. But as long as I know they have other Black women that they trust, I feel okay, right? Like I just want them to be held well.
Be held well.
So we are at our time. We do want to leave you with, why the African-centered way, right? I think from what we've heard from Brittany's story, from attending an African-centered school to, using that as the grounding for homeschooling her children and, being a good steward in the community, right? It is evidence that, children who are raised in an African-centered way are community-minded, right? And understand the value of collective well-being, right? That is not just about me. It's not about I. It is about the collective well-being. How do I influence spaces that I, belong to? Develop a reciprocal relationship with their community where they both contribute to and receive support from it. Not just saying that what I'm doing is, what I want to do, but I'm actually, contributing to, the bigger, the bigger destiny of the community. Have a strong self-identity and a deep sense of cultural pride. I think that, that really, was evident in Brittany's story. Exhibit high self-agency, empowering them to advocate for themselves and others. That is a theme that we saw tonight, advocating for our Black girls. Embracing intergenerational wisdom and the value and knowledge and guidance of elders, prioritizing harmony and unity, fostering relationship that is based on respect, cooperation, and mutual upliftment. And then lastly, understanding the importance, again, of responsibility and taking ownership of the role within the larger community, right? We all have a responsibility. Nobody's going to save our children, right? And if you saw those statistics and there was not something in you that said, I have to do something about this, right? Then we have more work to do, right? And so we thank you all for joining us tonight in this conversation about our Black girls. We hope that you gained, something from this, and that you go forth and, make a commitment to our children. It is our responsibility to raise our children. And so please be on the lookout. Next month, we're going to talk about our boys. We're going to keep the conversation going, but we want this to develop into something that is action, right? Because we can talk all day, we know the issues, and we know the solution. So at some point, we got to begin to co-create the solutions that are best for our children. So Dr. Brittany Clark, former student and now colleague of mine who is just up the street in Durham, I'm in Charlotte. I thank you for the work that you do, right? And we give you your flowers tonight, right? Because the work that you are doing for Black girls and the liberation of Black girls, I feel a little teary-eyed, right? Because anybody who makes a commitment to our children, that, you are doing God's work. And so we thank you for the work that you're doing, the commitment that you have. You got 7 kids, girl. You can say, I'm focused on my 7 kids. I don't care about the mother kids, right? But the African way is that what I do for myself and for my children and for my family, I do for others. So thank you for the work that you do. And thank you for coming tonight and sharing your story and the work that you do. So
Thank
you so
you.
much for having me. I really enjoyed being in conversation with y'all.
Thank you. And thank you to our community who showed up online, on Zoom, on YouTube. And we